I am someone who has always wanted it all. Not fame or fortune, not status or material things. I have always wanted body and spirit together, heart and mind together, all at once. I have struggled with culture's demand that I compartmentalize, culture's requirement that I keep my emotions at home, my mind at school, my spirit in church, and my body only in proscribed activities like dance or athletics. I was always motivated to bring the compartments together, somehow. During an academic presentation, let's sing. During an emotional conversation with a close friend, let's go for a walk. During a worship service, let's dance. During a family reunion, let's talk about why we have the family traditions that we do. As you can imagine, these suggestions were not always welcome, and sometimes shamed. This became a real problem when I began training to become a minister. I wanted to know why the church shames the body, why our culture separates out mind, body, heart, and spirit. I learned I could blame it on the philosophers, Plato in particular. Plato, as you may know, was an ancient Greek philosopher who believed that ideas are separate from the physical world. Although he was broad-minded, interested in politics, government, mathematics, philosophy, stories, and parables, he believed that ideas are forms that create reality, and that ideas are always right. It's the physical world that is mistaken. We can also fast forward to the 1600s and blame it on the French philosopher Descartes. You know, the famous guy who said, "I think, therefore I am." He separated reality into the material and the spiritual, body versus spirit, and he elevated the spiritual, separating it from the body. Descartes believed the spiritual part of reality belonged to God and the human mind alone. Although he studied widely too. He studied philosophy, physics, math, geometry, and anatomy, even dissecting the human brain to understand its connection with the senses. Well, I am more of a Spinoza gal myself. Spinoza believed that reality is all one substance, including the divine and nature. Everything that exists is part of this one substance. But according to Descartes, separation or dualism rules the day. Descartes believed the spiritual mind is always right, so long as it's not misled by what he called our passions, which do frequently mislead us in his opinion. So this dualistic way of thinking has permeated Western culture and of course influenced religion. And you know I'm simplifying everything right now, my main source being the Idiot's Guide to Philosophy. But I think when this infiltrated religion, it became dangerous when certain bodily realities and social realities were assigned to the separation of categories and the hierarchy of them. For example, historically, women and girls and people of color were attached to the body and the passions and denigrated, and then men and boys and white people attached to the spirit and the mind and elevated. So you see where this is going and where it has been going for a very long time. Well, when I was finishing seminary, right before heading out to Oregon for my internship, I met the co-founders of Interplay, Phil Porter and Cynthia Winton Henry. Phil wrote that first hymn that we sang this morning, Gathered Here. Wise and playful, they call each other body intellectuals. And they told me one way to make sense of culture's separation and compartmentalization is through the silverware drawer analogy. Stay with me on this. You know your silverware drawer. It usually has those dividers in it. They're very convenient. You've got your knives and your forks and your spoons, and they're separated, and you always know where they are. You can find them and use them when you need to. Sometimes you even have your silverware stacked perfectly with the points of the fork all going in the same drawer. It's a silverware drawer. So they were saying the problem is if we live our entire lives like that, thinking that everything has to be neat and tidy and in its separate compartment, we can get into trouble because life is really not that easy to separate and organize and make tidy, much as we might think it is. Don't you also have another drawer in your kitchen that has all this flotsam and jetsam in it, all these utensils, these things you think you're gonna use, like the cherry pitter and the egg yolk separator, and then of course there's the twist ties and the rubber bands and those batteries where you're not sure, you might still have some life in them, you don't really know, so you keep them, and then there's those cellophane packets of the little light bulb replacements for your twinkly lights. Who uses those? But I keep them, they're in that drawer. I think our lives are more like that drawer. Some of our experience is simple and easily categorized, and others is just flotsam and jetsam and all the things we think we might need and we don't really know what to do with. Now, not everyone dislikes compartmentalization. It's a skill. It can be useful to use sometimes. Some of us favor one way of being, one aspect of being more than another. It may be our home from which we relate to the world. Some people do live primarily in their mind. Some live more in their emotions. Some live more in their body. If thinking is your happy place, perhaps you live in your head. And we're grateful to you, because sometimes we need that clarity. If feelings flow freely and inform your actions, maybe your home is in your heart. And we're grateful to you to bringing us back to the emotions. If you encounter the world primarily through touch or through activity, maybe you learn best through doing, perhaps you live primarily in your body, and we're grateful for you for reminding us that we all have a body. Everyone has a body. Everyone alive has a body. Most everything we perceive comes through our senses that are in our bodies. I know that human beings are sometimes disassociated or otherwise unaware of our bodies. And, our culture kind of trains us to be that way. Religion trains us, consumerism trains us, and of course, if you have a history of personal or collective trauma, that disassociation is a survival skill. Yet healing those splits, connecting the separations, and living out our birthright as embodied humans is possible. So what's embodiment? It's a word that gets tossed around a lot these days. Embodiment means to give body to a spirit. So right there in the definition, body and spirit are connected. We enter this world through a body, and we become a body to live. Our body is the last thing we relinquish when we die. Some believe that body and spirit disconnect after death, and a person's spirit lives on after their body has died. But while we are alive, body and spirit are and can be connected. Choreographer Martha Graham said, "The body is a sacred garment. It is your first and last garment. It is what you enter life in and what you depart life with, and it should be treated with honor." Graham's quote makes me wonder, how might you treat your body with more honor? What would it be like to love your body as it is right now? What do you need to do in your life to be able to listen to what your body is telling you? me ask you something, and I may have asked you this in the past, but I'm going to ask you again. Has anyone here ever experienced stress? Man, you are all so chilled today. Must be the music and all that movement. I only saw a few hands, but I think everybody has had an experience of stress. What does that feel like in your body? Just call out a word. Tense. Sweat. Fatigue. Tight. Anxiety. Yeah. Anybody get that, like, feeling in their tummy? Shallow breathing. What was yours? Zoom head? Okay, now think about the opposite of stress. What does the opposite of stress feel like in your body? Floating. Relaxed. Relieved. It's hard to hear over all the fans, but I love the fans. I'm also hearing some great sound effects for the stress and the opposite of stress. So good, so you've had both experiences. So in interplay, we call that opposite of stress the physicality of grace. We can experience grace in our bodies. We don't have to wait for a jealous God to come along and randomly say, moment of grace. We can cultivate grace in our lives and in our bodies. So when we notice those bits of data, here's what I feel like when I'm feeling stress, here's what I feel like when I feel the opposite of stress, that's like body data. And then if you dig into that a little more, you're like, well, when and where and what am I doing and who am I with when I feel the stress or when I feel the opposite of stress? And you start noticing patterns. Oh, 8 Zoom meetings a day, stress. 0 Zoom meetings, no stress, grace. So once you notice those patterns, you can start making choices. Maybe you want to invite more grace into your life, into your body, into your relationships, into your community. And when we start making choices based on that data and those patterns, then we are using our body wisdom. We have unlocked our body wisdom, and we can carry that with us wherever we go. I want to tell you a little bit about one of my favorite authors, Barbara Brown Taylor. Maybe some of you have read some of her books. She's an Episcopal priest, she's a professor, she's an author, a beautiful writer. She also lives on a working farm in Georgia with her husband and many critters. So she writes often about the healing of the split between spirit and body within the Christian church. In her book, An Altar in the World, in the chapter called The Practice of Wearing Skin, she reflects on how folks are trying to make friends with their body and reintegrate understandings of the spirit and the flesh. She writes, I do not recall ever being told that my flesh is good in church or that God takes pleasure in it. Yet this is the central claim of the incarnation, that God trusted flesh and blood to bring divine love to earth. Right? You know that Christian theology that God trusted the divine nature in Jesus, and Jesus brought the divine to earth, and that's called the incarnation, flesh and blood. So she relates an example of helping people make this connection between spirit and body. And here's what she said. I led a workshop called Embodied Holiness, which drew a full house of 34 women and 6 men, both clergy people and lay people. And like me, they were interested in exploring what they knew and how they knew what they knew about God, because most of us knew what we knew about God from the creeds of the church, from studying the Oxford Annotated Study Bible, and from reading books. So one morning during this workshop, we explored the Beatitudes. Only instead of talking about them, we decided to embody them. And you know, the Beatitudes are those verses where Jesus said, "Blessed are those who do this, then they shall. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, they shall receive mercy," you know those. So Taylor said, in groups of 5 or 6, people went off to different corners of this large room, and they each had one of those verses from the Beatitudes that they were charged with bringing to life. So the assignment was to arrange the members of the group in a tableau that embodied the Beatitude without using any words, and then to show that to the rest of us. So as you can imagine, the resistance to doing this was enormous. People were verging on panic. We were adults, after all. Children act things out. Adults discuss things. But they went ahead. She wrote, "I watched a couple of seasoned pastors eye the door to see if they could get out before anyone stopped them. But they stayed, everyone stayed put, thanks largely to a number of emerging group leaders who I am pretty sure were all eldest children." So after about 15 minutes figuring out what they were going to do, the groups began to perform, and they didn't go in order of the scriptures. So the first beatitude was about those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Like we would probably say for social justice, right? Okay, so 5 women came out, and they arranged themselves seated in a circle facing out, and they turned into a bunch of baby birds squalling for food. They used their hands to make these giant beaks so that they looked like they were mostly mouths. And then the mama bird showed up and flew around the circle with food in her own beak, filling each of her babies in turn. And they rose as she approached. They were fed, they grew right before our eyes. And then, one by one, the beaks turned into wings, and they flew. It was so strong that no one spoke. The 5 women moved out of the center of the room as another group took their place. We watched another stunning beatitude, and then another. Finally, the "Blessed are those who mourn" group came out, all women again, and arranged themselves around the woman who had volunteered to lie as if dead on the ground so she didn't have to do any other movement. So she lay on the floor in stillness. The second woman sat down and cradled the first woman's head in her lap. 2 others knelt beside her, and 2 others stood over them until they made a sort of cathedral over the dead woman's body. Everyone was touching someone so that they were all linked together. But unlike the first group, no one moved. The women just held that pose so full of love and grief until a sob rose right out of the midst of them. Those of us watching did not know what to do. Was that the end? Was that sad, sad sound planned? But it did not sound planned. What was going on? Was this still pretend? Or was this real? Those of us watching the tableau froze, just like those who were in it. And then, when the whole room was still as a grave, the body of the woman pretending to be dead on the floor began to heave. As her soft sobbing grew louder, the other women bent over it. And then one of them began to weep, and then another gave a strong, strangled sounding little yelp until the whole tableau was heaving gently together over the body of the woman who had come back to life. I cannot tell you how long it lasted, a minute, an hour. But at some point, the women straightened up and wiped their eyes while we offered feeble applause. What did that mean? All I know is that God was there in the flesh, and that no one who saw it will ever forget it. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. The assignment was to bring the words to life. Now they will never lie quietly on the page for me again, because 5 women gave their lives to those words. They took them all the way to the edge of what they knew to do, and then Divine Spirit took them further until everything was made new. The women, the watchers, the words. Do we dismiss the body's wisdom because it does not use words? Yet the body knows, not just the individual body, but the cathedral we make when we bend our bodies together over one as good as dead. Friends, the soul loves the body. They are connected. They are one. When we deny that truth, we deny the sacredness of life residing right here and right now. We have such wisdom available in our individual bodies and the body of this beloved community. We can forgive our bodies for letting us down. We can thank our bodies for all that they have carried for us. We can give ourselves and each other the embodiment of grace. May it be so, and amen.